Sarah Martinez stood in the military supply store, her trembling fingers wrapped around a faded olive green beret that would either make her the laughingstock of her entire unit or prove that sometimes the most impossible dreams require the most unexpected tools. What she didn't know was that this single piece of fabric would transform not just her military career, but spark a movement that would reach the highest levels of government and change policy for millions of women in uniform. The daughter of a janitor and a waitress, Sarah had already defied every odds stacked against her. But the real battle was just beginning, and it would be fought not on foreign soil but in the mess halls, training grounds, and boardrooms where prejudice wore the mask of tradition. This is the story of how one woman's refusal to accept no turned a symbol of exclusion into a beacon of change, proving that courage isn't about the size of your weapon. It's about the size of your determination to use whatever you have to fight for what's right. Sarah Martinez learned early that dreams were luxuries her family couldn't afford. Growing up in a cramped two-bedroom apartment in East Los Angeles, she watched her father Miguel leave for work every morning at 4:30, his janitor's uniform pressed despite being worn thin from years of washing. Her mother Rosa worked double shifts at the local diner, coming home with grease stains on her apron and stories about customers who treated her like she was invisible. The walls of their apartment were thin, and Sarah could hear her parents' hushed conversations late at night about overdue bills and broken appliances they couldn't replace. Money was always tight, opportunities were scarce, and for most kids in their neighborhood, the future looked a lot like the present. But Sarah was different. She had something her circumstances couldn't touch, an unshakable belief that she was meant for something bigger. At Roosevelt High School, Sarah excelled despite having to work part-time at a local grocery store to help with family expenses. Her guidance counselor, Mrs. Patterson, noticed her potential early on. Sarah wasn't just smart. She had a natural leadership quality that made other students gravitate toward her. When budget cuts threatened to eliminate the school's debate team, Sarah organized fundraisers and convinced local businesses to sponsor them. When younger students were being bullied, she started a peer mentorship program that became a model for other schools in the district. But it was during a career day presentation that everything changed. Staff Sergeant Maria Gonzalez, a recruiter for the Army Rangers, spoke to the assembled students about military service. She was polished, confident, and commanded respect in a way that made Sarah sit up straighter in her seat. When Sergeant Gonzalez mentioned the Special Operations Units and their elite training programs, something clicked for Sarah. After the presentation, Sarah approached the recruiter with questions. Sergeant Gonzalez was patient, but realistic about the challenges facing women in the military, especially in combat roles. Special operations units like the Rangers had been male-dominated for decades, and while policies were slowly changing, the reality on the ground was still difficult for women who wanted to break barriers. "It's not impossible," Sergeant Gonzalez told her, "but you'll need to be twice as good to get half the recognition. Are you prepared for that?" Sarah didn't hesitate. "I've been preparing for that my whole life." That conversation sparked months of intense preparation. Sarah began training at a local gym, pushing her body beyond what she thought possible. She studied military history, memorized rank structures, and learned everything she could about special operations. Her parents were initially confused by her sudden interest in the military, but they supported her dreams even when they didn't fully understand them. The day Sarah announced her intention to enlist and eventually try out for special operations, the reaction at school was mixed. Some teachers were supportive, recognizing her determination and capabilities, but others were skeptical. Coach Williams, who had coached football for 25 years, openly laughed when she mentioned her goals. "Special ops," he said, shaking his head. "Sweetheart, those units aren't looking for people like you. They need soldiers who can carry a 100-pound pack through the desert, not someone who'll break under pressure." The comment stung, but it also fueled something deeper in Sarah. She had faced out before, but this felt different. This wasn't just about her capability. It was about her right to even dream of serving at that level. Her best friend Jennifer tried to be supportive, but was clearly worried. "Sarah, maybe you should consider other options. There are lots of ways to serve in the military without putting yourself through something that might be impossible." Even her family expressed concerns. Her father, who had enormous respect for the military but had never considered it an option for women in combat roles, gently suggested she might want to consider nursing or military intelligence instead. But Sarah had already made up her mind. The more people told her it wasn't realistic, the more determined she became. She knew the statistics. Very few women had successfully completed special operations training, and those who had faced enormous challenges along the way. But statistics didn't account for individual determination, and Sarah was confident that her combination of intelligence, physical preparation, and sheer willpower would be enough. The first step was basic training, and Sarah threw herself into preparation with an intensity that surprised even her. She woke up at 5 every morning to run, spent her lunch breaks doing calisthenics, and used her earnings from the grocery store to pay for a gym membership. Her grades remained high, but every free moment was dedicated to physical and mental preparation. During her senior year, Sarah's transformation became noticeable to everyone around her. She had always been fit, but now she was genuinely athletic. More importantly, she carried herself with a confidence that came from knowing exactly what she wanted and being willing to work for it. When classmates asked about her plans after graduation, she didn't hesitate to share her goals. The reactions were predictable. Some were impressed by her ambition. Others were dismissive. A few were openly hostile, suggesting that she was trying to prove something that didn't need proving, or that she would take opportunities away from men who really needed them. The most painful reaction came from someone she hadn't expected. Her uncle Carlos, a Vietnam veteran whom she had always admired, visited for Sunday dinner and heard about her plans. His response was swift and crushing. "Mija, you're smart and strong, but war isn't a place for women," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I've seen what combat does to people. It's not about being tough or brave. It's about surviving things that would break anyone, and men are just built differently for that kind of stress." Sarah felt her face flush, but she kept her voice steady. "Uncle Carlos, with respect, how do you know what I'm built for if I've never been given the chance to prove it?" The conversation that followed was uncomfortable for everyone. Carlos wasn't trying to be cruel. He genuinely believed he was protecting his niece from disappointment and danger. But Sarah heard something different in his words. She heard the same assumptions that had limited opportunities for people like her for generations. That night, alone in her room, Sarah made a decision that would define everything that followed. She wasn't just going to pursue special operations training. She was going to succeed at it. Not to prove her uncle wrong, not to show up Coach Williams, but to prove to herself and anyone else who was listening that excellence had nothing to do with gender and everything to do with preparation, determination, and heart. The application process for military service was straightforward, but Sarah knew that getting accepted was just the beginning. The real challenge would come during basic training and then later during the selection process for special operations. She had read enough to know that the physical requirements were demanding, but the mental challenges were often what separated those who succeeded from those who didn't. As graduation approached, Sarah's certainty about her path only grew stronger. She had earned a full scholarship to the state university, and several teachers urged her to reconsider military service. The scholarship represented financial security and a more traditional path to success. But Sarah knew that taking the safe route would mean giving up on something she truly wanted for something that simply seemed more practical. The night before graduation, Sarah sat with her parents in their small living room and talked through her decision one final time. Her mother cried, not from disappointment, but from worry about the dangers her daughter would face. Her father was quiet for a long time before speaking. "You know, Mija, when I was your age, I wanted to be a teacher," he said slowly. "But people like us, we didn't think about careers like that. We thought about jobs that would pay the bills. You think bigger than I ever did, and maybe that's exactly what you need to do." That conversation gave Sarah the final confirmation she needed. 3 weeks after graduation, she would report for basic training. But first, she had one more preparation to make. She had heard about a military surplus store downtown that sold authentic gear, including berets from various special operations units. She wanted to see one up close, to hold in her hands the symbol of what she was working toward. The store was cramped and dusty, filled with gear from different eras and conflicts. Behind the counter was an older man with faded tattoos on his forearms and a skeptical expression. When Sarah asked to see special operations berets, he looked her up and down slowly. "These aren't costumes, little girl," he said finally. "These represent something you have to earn." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I'm not looking for a costume. I'm looking for motivation." He studied her for another moment, then reached under the counter and pulled out a faded olive green beret. It was worn but dignified, and when Sarah held it in her hands, she felt the weight of everything it represented. "That belonged to a ranger who served 3 tours," the man said, his voice softer now. "He didn't make it home from the last one." Sarah nodded respectfully, understanding the gravity of what she was holding. This wasn't just a piece of fabric. It was a symbol of sacrifice, commitment, and excellence. As she handed it back, she made a silent promise to herself and to the memory of whoever had worn it before. "Someday," she said quietly, "I'm going to earn one of these." The man behind the counter didn't laugh. Instead, he looked at her with something that might have been respect. "If you do," he said, "make sure you remember what it cost to get it." 3 weeks later, Sarah climbed onto a bus that would take her to Fort Benning, Georgia, for basic training. As the bus pulled away from Los Angeles, she pressed her face to the window and watched her neighborhood disappear behind her. She was leaving behind everything familiar, everyone who doubted her, and everyone who believed in her. What lay ahead was uncertain, but Sarah carried with her something more powerful than fear or doubt. She carried the unshakable conviction that some dreams are worth any sacrifice, and that the only way to prove what's possible is to refuse to accept what others believe is impossible. The Georgia heat hit Sarah like a physical wall when she stepped off the bus at Fort Benning. The air was thick and humid, carrying the sounds of drill sergeants shouting and boots marching in formation. As she gathered her single duffel bag and joined the line of new recruits, Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and determination that drowned out any nervousness. Basic training was everything she had expected and more. The physical demands were intense, but Sarah had prepared well. While other recruits struggled with early morning runs and obstacle courses, she found herself keeping pace with the strongest members of her unit. The mental challenges were different from anything she had experienced, but her years of working while going to school had taught her how to function under pressure and push through exhaustion. What surprised her was how much she loved it. The structure, the clear expectations, the feeling of being part of something larger than herself. All of it felt like home in a way that nothing ever had before. When her drill sergeant, Staff Sergeant Johnson, pushed the recruits to their limits, Sarah found herself wanting to exceed those limits rather than just meet them. But it was during week 6 of basic training that Sarah first encountered the institutional barriers she would face throughout her military career. The announcement came during evening formation. Volunteers were being sought for a special leadership training program that would run parallel to basic training. It was designed to identify potential candidates for advanced military occupational specialties, including special operations support roles. Sarah immediately volunteered, along with several other recruits. The next morning, she reported to the designated classroom, eager to begin the additional training. But when she walked through the door, she was met with stares and whispers. Of the 20 volunteers, she was one of only 3 women, and the only one who had indicated interest in combat-related specialties. The instructor, Captain Morrison, was professional but clearly surprised by the composition of the group. As he outlined the program's goals and requirements, Sarah noticed that his examples and scenarios consistently assumed male participants. When he discussed physical fitness standards, he mentioned the different requirements for men and women in a way that suggested the lower standards for women were accommodations rather than equivalencies. During the first practical exercise, the group was divided into teams and given a tactical problem to solve. Sarah found herself assigned to a team with 4 men, none of whom seemed interested in her input, despite her having scored highest on the written examination that preceded the exercise. When she offered suggestions, they were politely ignored. When she asked questions, they were answered by one of her teammates rather than the instructor. The pattern continued for several days until Sarah decided to address it directly. During a break in training, she approached her team leader, a recruit named Brad who had emerged as one of the strongest performers in their basic training unit. "Brad, I need to ask you something, and I'd appreciate a straight answer," she said. "Are you and the others ignoring my input because you think I can't contribute, or because you're uncomfortable working with a woman in this context?" Brad looked uncomfortable, but didn't deny her observation. "Look, Sarah, it's not personal. You're obviously smart and capable. But when we get to the real thing, when we're talking about special operations, you're going to be working with guys who have been together for years. They're not going to want someone they have to worry about protecting." Sarah felt a familiar flash of frustration, but she kept her voice calm. "Who said anything about needing protection? I'm not asking anyone to lower their standards or change their mission. I'm asking for the chance to prove I can meet the same standards everyone else has to meet." "But that's just it," Brad continued. "The standards aren't really the same. Everyone knows the physical requirements are different for women, and in a real combat situation, those differences could get people killed." The conversation that followed was civil but pointed. Sarah explained that she had consistently exceeded the male physical fitness standards during basic training, and that she was asking to be evaluated based on performance, not assumptions. Brad listened respectfully, but remained skeptical about the wisdom of integrating women into special operations units. That conversation crystallized something important for Sarah. The barrier she was facing wasn't just about proving her individual capability. It was about challenging a system that assumed women were inherently less capable, even when evidence suggested otherwise. She realized that success would require not just meeting standards, but exceeding them so decisively that doubt became impossible. The next week brought the leadership program's final exercise, a 3-day field training event that would test everything they had learned. Teams were required to navigate through a series of challenges that combined physical endurance, tactical thinking, and leadership under stress. Sarah's team would be evaluated not just on their success, but on how effectively they worked together. Sarah made a decision that would define her approach to every challenge that followed. Instead of trying to prove herself by outperforming her teammates, she focused on making the entire team better. When Brad struggled with map reading during a night navigation exercise, Sarah quietly helped him find the correct route without making him feel incompetent. When another teammate, Marcus, was struggling to keep up during a long movement with heavy packs, she redistributed some of his equipment among the team without being asked. By the second day, the dynamic within the team had shifted. Her teammates began actively seeking her input on tactical problems and relying on her strengths in areas where she excelled. When they faced a challenge that required someone to climb a rope and secure a belay line for the rest of the team, they unanimously chose Sarah, recognizing that her climbing ability was superior to anyone else's. The final challenge was a simulated hostage rescue scenario that required the team to plan and execute a complex operation under time pressure. Sarah found herself naturally assuming the leadership role, coordinating the team's movement, and making real-time tactical decisions. When the exercise concluded, their team had achieved the best overall score in the program. Captain Morrison's debrief was thorough and professional. He praised the team's performance and specifically noted Sarah's leadership during the final exercise. But it was his private conversation with her afterward that proved most significant. "Martinez, I'll be honest with you," he said. "When you volunteered for this program, I had reservations. Not because I doubted your individual capability, but because I wasn't sure how you would fit into the team dynamic. What I observed this week challenged some of my assumptions. Sarah listened carefully, understanding that this conversation could influence her future opportunities. You didn't try to prove you were as good as the men on your team, Morrison continued. You proved you could make the team better. That a different kind of leadership, and it's exactly what special operations units need. I'm recommending you for advanced infantry training, and if you continue to perform at this level, I'll support your application for special operations selection. The recommendation from Captain Morrison opened doors that had previously been closed. Sarah completed basic training with distinction and was accepted into advanced infantry training, where she would learn the specialized skills required for combat roles. But, more importantly, she had gained something invaluable, proof that excellence could overcome prejudice when it was undeniable and consistent. Advanced infantry training introduced new challenges and new skeptics. Sarah was one of only 5 women in a program of over 200 soldiers, and the scrutiny was constant. Every mistake was magnified. Every success was scrutinized for signs that standards had been lowered. The physical demands were greater than anything she had experienced, and the mental pressure was relentless. But Sarah had learned something crucial during the leadership program. The key to success wasn't just meeting expectations, but redefining them. When instructors set fitness benchmarks, she exceeded them. When marksmanship standards were established, she shot expert level consistently. When leadership opportunities arose, she volunteered and delivered results that impressed even the most skeptical observers. Halfway through advanced training, Sarah faced her biggest test yet. During a live-fire exercise, her squad leader was injured by shrapnel from an improperly thrown grenade. With bullets flying overhead and simulated casualties mounting, Sarah assumed command of the squad and successfully completed the mission while ensuring everyone reached safety. The after-action review was conducted by Colonel Patricia Hayes, one of the few female officers in a command position at the base. Sarah had never met Colonel Hayes, but she knew her reputation. A tough, no-nonsense leader who had broken barriers throughout her own career without compromising standards or making excuses. Sergeant Martinez, Colonel Hayes began, using Sarah's newly acquired rank. What you accomplished today was noteworthy not because you're a woman, but because you're a soldier who performed exceptionally under extreme pressure. That distinction is important. Sarah nodded, understanding the subtle but crucial point Colonel Hayes was making. However, the colonel continued, I want you to understand something about the path you're choosing. Special operations isn't just about individual excellence. It's about being part of a brotherhood that has been forged through decades of shared sacrifice. Some of those men will never fully accept you, no matter how well you perform. Are you prepared for that? Sarah had thought about this question many times, but hearing it from someone who had navigated similar challenges gave it new weight. Colonel, with respect, I'm not asking to be accepted. I'm asking for the opportunity to earn my place through performance. If I can do that, acceptance becomes irrelevant. Colonel Hayes smiled for the first time during the conversation. That's exactly the right answer. I'm going to make some calls about your special operations application. There are people who need to hear about what you're accomplishing here. 3 weeks later, Sarah received notification that her application for special operations selection had been approved. She would report to Fort Bragg in 6 months to begin the most challenging training program in the military. But first, she had to complete advanced infantry training and serve for a minimum period with a regular unit to gain operational experience. Her assignment was to the 82nd Airborne Division, where she would serve as a squad leader in an infantry unit preparing for deployment. When Sarah reported to her new unit, she was greeted by First Sergeant Williams, a veteran with over 15 years of experience and a reputation for being tough but fair. Martinez, I'm going to be straight with you, he said during their initial meeting. Half the men in this unit think you don't belong here, and the other half are waiting to see if you'll prove them right or wrong. I don't care what anyone thinks. I care about results. Give me results, and you'll have my support. Fail to meet standards, and I'll personally ensure your transfer to a position that better matches your capabilities. Sarah appreciated the direct communication. She knew that earning respect in this environment would require consistent performance over time, not just isolated moments of excellence. Over the following months, she focused on being the kind of leader her soldiers could depend on, regardless of their initial assumptions about her capabilities. The deployment to Afghanistan came 8 months later. Sarah's unit was tasked with providing security for supply convoys and conducting routine patrols in a relatively stable region. It wasn't the high-intensity combat that special operations units faced, but it was real operational experience with genuine stakes. During her deployment, Sarah led over 50 combat patrols without losing a single soldier under her command. She earned a Bronze Star for her actions during an ambush that could have resulted in significant casualties if not for her quick thinking and tactical expertise. More importantly, she earned the respect of soldiers who had initially been skeptical about her presence in their unit. When Master Sergeant Johnson, a 20-year veteran and one of her harshest early critics, wrote her performance evaluation, his comments were unequivocal. Sergeant Martinez is one of the finest squad leaders I have served with in 2 decades. Her tactical knowledge, physical courage, and leadership under fire are exemplary. Any unit would be fortunate to have her, and any soldier would be proud to serve under her command. As her deployment neared its end, Sarah received the notification she had been waiting for. Her slot for Special Operations Selection had been confirmed. She would report to Fort Bragg 60 days after returning from Afghanistan to begin the program that would determine whether her years of preparation and sacrifice would finally pay off. But on the flight home, Sarah realized that something important had already been proven. She had succeeded not by changing standards or asking for special consideration, but by meeting the same requirements expected of everyone else while carrying the additional burden of constant scrutiny. The woman who had once been told that special operations units weren't looking for people like her had spent the last 2 years proving that excellence had nothing to do with gender and everything to do with character. The bus carrying Sarah to Fort Bragg was filled with soldiers from across the military, all heading to Special Operations Selection. The atmosphere was tense with nervous energy and quiet determination. Sarah observed her fellow candidates during the long ride, noting their physical conditioning and trying to gauge their mental preparedness. She was the only woman on the bus, but by now, that fact barely registered as unusual. Special Operations Selection was legendary for its brutal physical and mental demands. The program was designed to identify soldiers who could function effectively under the extreme stress of special operations missions, and the attrition rate reflected the difficulty of those standards. Only about 20% of candidates would successfully complete the program, and Sarah knew that every aspect of her performance would be scrutinized more intensely than any of her male counterparts. The first week was focused on physical assessments and baseline testing. Sarah's scores were consistently in the top 10% across all metrics. Her years of preparation had paid off. She was stronger, faster, and more enduring than she had ever been. But the real test began in week 2 with the introduction of psychological stress designed to identify mental weaknesses and break down candidates who couldn't handle pressure. The instructors, all veterans of special operations units, were professional but deliberately challenging. They pushed every candidate to their breaking point, looking for signs of mental fragility or unwillingness to continue when conditions became unbearable. Sleep deprivation, extreme physical demands, and constant evaluation created an environment where only the most determined candidates could survive. Sarah's first major test came during a 48-hour field exercise with no sleep and minimal food. Candidates were required to complete a series of tasks while carrying heavy packs over difficult terrain. Several candidates had already dropped out by the second day, and those remaining were operating on pure determination and muscle memory. During the exercise, Sarah was paired with a candidate named Derek, a Marine with an impressive record who had initially been dismissive of her presence in the program. As the hours wore on and exhaustion began affecting everyone's performance, Derek began to struggle with navigation and decision-making. Sarah quietly helped him stay on track without making it obvious to the instructors, understanding that her own success was meaningless if it came at the cost of a teammate's failure. When the exercise concluded, Derek pulled Sarah aside during their brief rest period. "I need to say something," he told her, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "I came into this program thinking you didn't belong here. I was wrong. You're not just keeping up, you're making everyone around you better. That's the kind of soldier I want covering my back in a real fight." The acknowledgement meant more to Sarah than any official recognition could have. It represented a shift in thinking that went beyond individual prejudice to recognition of capability based on performance. But she knew that one convert didn't represent institutional change, and the biggest challenges were still ahead. Week 4 brought the program's most notorious component: survival training in simulated prisoner-of-war conditions. Candidates were subjected to interrogation techniques, sensory deprivation, and physical stress designed to test their ability to resist breaking under extreme pressure. Many candidates who had excelled in previous phases were eliminated during this portion of the program. Sarah's approach to this challenge was different from most of her fellow candidates. Instead of trying to endure through pure physical toughness, she relied on mental techniques she had developed during her years of preparation. She focused on maintaining her sense of identity and purpose even when instructors tried to break down her psychological defenses. The breakthrough moment came during a particularly intense interrogation session. The instructor, a veteran special operations soldier named Master Sergeant Coleman, was using every technique available to get candidates to break character and reveal information. One by one, candidates were eliminated for failing to maintain their cover stories or showing signs of mental collapse. When Sarah's turn came, Master Sergeant Coleman immediately focused on her gender as a pressure point. "You don't belong here," he shouted, his face inches from hers. "You're taking a spot that should go to someone who can actually do this job. When you quit, and you will quit, you'll prove that this whole experiment was a mistake." Sarah looked him directly in the eye and responded with calm certainty. "Sergeant, my job is to resist interrogation and protect information. My gender has nothing to do with my ability to do that job. If you want me to break, you'll need to find a better pressure point than something I've been dealing with successfully for the past 3 years." The room fell silent. Master Sergeant Coleman studied her for a long moment, then moved on to the next candidate without another word. Later, during the debrief, he would note in Sarah's file that she had demonstrated exceptional psychological resilience under pressure. As the program entered its final phases, the number of remaining candidates had dwindled to 37, including Sarah. The last challenges focused on mission planning and execution under combat conditions, testing candidates' ability to apply everything they had learned while operating with minimal supervision and maximum responsibility. Sarah's final test came in the form of a complex hostage rescue scenario. She was assigned as team leader for a mission that required her to plan and execute an operation with a team of candidates she had never worked with before. The scenario included multiple complications, limited intelligence, changing conditions, and time pressure that demanded quick decision-making. As Sarah briefed her team on the mission plan, she noticed something significant. The candidates assigned to her team were listening intently and offering constructive input without any apparent concern about taking orders from a woman. The months of proving herself through performance had gradually shifted the dynamic from skepticism to respect. The mission itself was executed flawlessly. Sarah's team successfully completed all objectives while maintaining the safety of simulated hostages and avoiding casualties among team members. The after-action review was conducted by the program commander, Colonel Martinez, no relation to Sarah despite sharing a surname. "Candidate Martinez," Colonel Martinez began, "your performance throughout this program has been exceptional. More importantly, your leadership during today's exercise demonstrated exactly the kind of tactical thinking and calm decision-making we need in special operations. You've earned your place in this brotherhood through merit, dedication, and performance that would be outstanding from any candidate regardless of background. 3 days later, graduation ceremonies were held for the 22 candidates who had successfully completed selection. Sarah stood with her fellow graduates as they received their special operations qualifications. But the moment that mattered most came when she was privately presented with her own olive green beret. Colonel Hayes, who had traveled from her new assignment to attend the ceremony, was the one who presented Sarah with the beret. "Sergeant Martinez," she said, "this represents more than your individual achievement. This represents proof that excellence has no gender, and that the military is strongest when it draws on the full range of talent available to it." As Sarah held the beret, the same type she had seen in that dusty surplus store years earlier, she thought about everyone who had doubted this moment was possible. But she also thought about the soldiers who had supported her, the instructors who had evaluated her fairly, and the institution that had ultimately rewarded merit over prejudice. The real impact of Sarah's achievement became clear in the weeks that followed. Her success in special operations selection was noted at the highest levels of military leadership, contributing to policy discussions about expanding opportunities for women in combat roles. Media coverage of her achievement inspired other women to pursue similar paths, while her example helped convince skeptics that integration could work without compromising standards. But perhaps the most meaningful response came from unexpected sources. Sarah received a letter from her old high school coach, the one who had laughed at her goals years earlier. "I was wrong," Coach Williams wrote. "I let my assumptions blind me to your potential. You've accomplished something remarkable, and, more importantly, you've done it the right way. I'm proud to say I knew you before you proved that anything is possible." Sarah's first assignment after selection was to an elite unit deploying to a high-threat environment. As she prepared for the mission, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The young woman who had once been told that special operations units weren't looking for people like her had not only proven that assumption wrong, but had helped change the entire conversation about what was possible. Her unit's pre-deployment training was intense and focused, designed to prepare them for the complex missions they would face. Sarah's teammates were professional and supportive, treating her as they would any new member of the unit. The skepticism and doubt that had characterized her earlier experiences were absent, replaced by the mutual respect that comes from shared standards and proven capability. During one of their final training exercises, Sarah's unit commander, Major Thompson, pulled her aside for a private conversation. "Martinez, I want you to understand something about your role here," he said. "You're not representing women in special operations. You're a special operations soldier who happens to be a woman. Your job is to be the best soldier you can be, period. Everything else is secondary." The distinction was important to Sarah. She had never wanted to be treated differently because of her gender, and she didn't want her success to be viewed as a symbol rather than a personal achievement. At the same time, she understood that her presence in the unit was historically significant, and that her performance would influence opportunities for future women seeking similar paths. 6 months into her deployment, Sarah's unit was tasked with a high-risk mission that would test all their training and preparation. Intelligence had identified a high-value target in a heavily defended compound, and the mission required the kind of precise execution that special operations units were trained for. As the team prepared for the mission, Sarah felt the familiar mixture of nervousness and excitement that preceded dangerous operations. But she also felt something new, complete confidence in her team and her place within it. The years of preparation, the months of proving herself, and the gradual earning of respect had culminated in this moment of absolute professional equality. The mission was successful, resulting in the capture of the target and the recovery of intelligence that prevented a significant terrorist attack. Sarah's performance during the operation was exemplary, earning her a Silver Star and the respect of the entire special operations community. But the real measure of her success came in a different form. 3 months after the mission, Sarah received a package from her old neighborhood in Los Angeles. Inside was a letter from a teenage girl named Maria, along with a newspaper clipping about Sarah's military achievements. "My guidance counselor showed me this article about you," Maria wrote. "I want to be a soldier like you when I graduate. My family thinks I should choose something more practical, but after reading about what you accomplished, I know that practical isn't the same as possible. Thank you for showing me that dreams are worth fighting for, even when everyone says they're impossible." As Sarah read the letter, she realized that her greatest achievement wasn't the beret she had earned or the mission she had completed. It was the proof she had provided that excellence and determination could overcome any barrier, and that the only limits that truly matter are the ones we place on ourselves. Years later, when Sarah was promoted to the rank of sergeant major and assigned to recruit and train the next generation of special operations soldiers, she would often think about that teenage girl from her old neighborhood. Sarah's office wall displayed her commendations and achievements, but the letter from Maria held a place of honor among them. The woman who had once been laughed at for dreaming too big had not only achieved those dreams, but had opened doors for others to follow. The olive green beret that had once seemed impossible to earn now sat on her desk as a daily reminder that the most important battles are often fought not against external enemies, but against the limitations that others try to place on our potential. And when young soldiers, especially women, came to her office seeking advice about pursuing challenging military careers, Sarah's response was always the same. Excellence has no gender, no background, no limitation except the ones you accept. If you're willing to work harder than anyone expects and never settle for being good enough, then anything is possible. I know because I lived it. The story of Sarah Martinez became more than just an individual success. It became proof that institutions can change, that barriers can be overcome, and that sometimes the most impossible dreams require nothing more than the refusal to accept that they're impossible. Her legacy lived on in every soldier who chose to pursue their goals despite skepticism, and in every person who decided that being told no was simply an invitation to prove the doubters wrong.